Alright, this is Jake Rutten from 3X Velocity Camp. We're going to be walking through his delivery. So just look, coming out of leg lift here, look how quickly you collapse your force vector. So you must be pushing early when that leg goes in like that. See how the back leg, the drive leg is pushing in? Yeah. And you're also, that could mean you're being quad dominant. What's happening is your femur is internally rotating here, and you could be loading into your quad, which is going to affect how you come out of your leg lift. But which is right there, as you can see, it's pretty much, I'd say it's collapsed. When that knee is inside your ankle and hip, it's collapsing. So you're loading internally, and that's why it's going to help you squatting to load externally, because that's what you have to do when you squat. You can't squat like that, right? So what that does is it just puts you in a position where your knee is not protected there. So it doesn't want to drive there because it could literally blow the knee out. So it creates, just what happens is the front leg will swing and it just creates rotation. You don't really get that force off the rubber. So that's in that position we talk about torsion, where like if I drew it out, it would look like this. You want this twisted that way.
Right.
Okay, so you take your femur and you turn it this way. Okay. That's important because that's going to, like I said, that's going to give you more stability to really get force off the rubber. I mean, you're not pushing your knee, say, in this position towards the camera. It's going, towards the camera this way, but not towards the camera this way. So you are sitting back, which is good. You're not opening yet. Both your glove side and your front side are staying closed. You're just not in that position to really create a lot of force. So you're right here at this point, your knee is just down. So you're trying to rotate pretty quickly. I mean, it looks like right at your leg lift, your goal is to push your knee down and rotate. So you're hitting front foot here. Your femur is doing its best to rotate, and that's what helps open your hip. It's just there's no force through it, so it doesn't really drive your hip. So usually if you're driving and your femur or your back leg and thigh is that far down, your hips are way more open than that. Typically when your femur turns inwards, your hip comes around, and it's not, just because all that is a collapse. So that's a collapsing back leg. That's why in a lot of the drills we're focusing on pushing and force through the back leg, so you can feel what it's like to drive your hips open. So you can see here, even though when your knee's down, normally, like I said, the hips are open, and you can see they're barely separated here. So when that hip gets open, look how your shoulders catch up. The goal would be to push force through it to right here when your hips open, your trunk is still closed, and it happens a lot more quicker. And if you look at your kinematic sequencing, basically how are you sequencing hip, trunk, arm, you can see your hips going off right here. So that's the red dot is the hip peak. Then the trunk peak comes later, so there's some separation, it's just not that much. And in between there is the glove, which is the blue. The glove is pulling with the hips to create rotation. But if we look in linear kinematic sequencing, that was how you were sequencing in rotation from hip, trunk to arm. This is how are you sequencing towards the target as pushing the hip forward. And you can see the red line and the green line are the same thing as far as the hip and the trunk. And you can see angular, there was separation, but linear there isn't. They're stacked up. So they're rotating one in front of the other, just barely. But when they start to push force forward, which is pretty early right here, they're pushing force forward together at the same time. So as much as we want to see separation angular, we want to see it linear. So meaning if that red hump is here, we'd want the green hump out here. Specifically when the trunk opens. Notice when your trunk opens, that green linear line is shutting off. So you literally have no forward energy at the point you're ready to throw the ball.
Wow.
So that's when we collapse that leg, you're not creating the force forward. So then when things rotate and open here, all the power is shutting off because it's just rotating. So right there, you're releasing the ball right there, and there's literally no. Well, I mean, that point you should see the arm receiving the force, but look how far off the linear force was. It was like tenths of a second. It was 2/10 of a second behind. You'd want it just coming out of the linear forces as your arm is now taking the energy. Okay. So if we collapse that leg, which is the only leg on the ground, which is the only leg that can create momentum to the target, then we shut off all of our power once the chain, or once the energy or the upper body gets in a position to throw. We have no more linear energy left, right? That's why when you're sitting in those drills and you're pushing and then you feel more of that energy coming up, your ball speed goes up. Two things are happening when you do that. Your ball speed goes up and your arm torques are coming down. Because the more energy is at the end of the chain, the less your arm has to create the energy, right?
Right.
So your goal is to work on these linear kinematics to where when you land, you're peaking linear, you're not shutting off linear. So when your front foot hits, you want to feel energy moving up. You don't want to feel energy shutting off like this, where it's just you're just rotating.
And that's what's happening here. It shuts off.
So you can see you land right there. You land, and your energy's peaking, and then it just shuts off as you go forward. I want to land, and as my trunk is rotating, I still want my trunk energy peaking.
So that's the green line?
Yeah, I want the green line still going at that point. So that just means you're running out of energy. And why are you running out of energy? Because you're collapsing your leg. Okay. So you can see, that gives you an idea of how it's sequencing. But if we want to look at like trunk orientation, you can see when you land, I would say you're cocking your arm pretty high here. Maybe that's helping you hold your trunk contralato, which is fine, but that can cause shoulder impingements when you put your throwing arm that high. When you turn, I mean, I like where your trunk is here, but it's just when you land, it might be a little high. If you look at your trunk orientation, it's about 29 degrees here to your glove side. That's excessive. We don't want to go past 25 because it starts to put a lot of stress on the arm. So you hit 30 at max. And when you were landing here, you were at 6. The reason you kept going to your glove side is because you were just rotating. Remember, we didn't have any linear energy. So if we had linear energy, we would be pushing the trunk forward as opposed to continuing just to spin off.
So that's like trying to make up
energy. Yeah, if you don't have energy, right, you just all you can use is your glove at that point, and your glove's just going to pull you off, and that's what's happening. The arm kind of freaks out there, and then your front leg never really drives back either. So that's another key point. If you could push that leg back, that picks up your linear energy too. You get your linear energy from your back leg, and your front leg drives. So your back leg pushing forward creates energy, and your front leg pushing back creates linear energy.
Okay.
And you're not even using those. You're collapsing. That's why there's a 10 miles an hour velocity when you can hold torsion and push harder, and then you can stabilize that and push back. And then ultimately you have to see it optimize your hip to shoulder separation, and then you'll get a ton more energy coming up.